There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that retrospect will later frame in gold leaf and hang in the most sacred gallery of your memory. They are rarely loud. They do not announce themselves with trumpets or fanfare. Instead, they slip in quietly, wearing the plain clothes of a Tuesday night, a shared blanket, the low murmur of a movie you are not watching. For me, that moment smelled of the sandalwood soap Liam always used and the subtle, electric scent of an approaching rainstorm. It felt like the weight of his head on my shoulder, a gradual, trusting surrender that sent a quiet, devastating tremor through the foundations of my carefully constructed world. He was asleep, or pretending to be, and I was holding my breath, cataloging the rise and fall of his chest as if it were the only tide that mattered in the universe. This was the precipice. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and holy, that whatever happened after this breath, and the next, would irrevocably change the landscape of my life. I had spent a decade building walls to protect myself from this exact proximity, and here he was, dismantling them brick by brick in his sleep, completely unaware of the beautiful, catastrophic work he was doing. The air in the room was thick with unspoken things, a dense archive of a friendship that had weathered years and distance, and now, in the dim glow of the television, it was threatening to combust into something else entirely. I did not move. I did not dare. I just sat there, a statue carved from longing, and let the moment etch itself into me, a photograph developing slowly in the darkroom of my heart. This, I thought, is how it begins, or how it ends. We had met in the way that people in small towns often do, by simple, unavoidable geographical destiny. Our houses were separated by a stretch of lawn that both our fathers mowed with a competitive, silent fury every Saturday morning. Liam was all kinetic energy and sunshine, the kind of boy who seemed to be perpetually in motion, his laughter a bright, percussive sound that carried easily through the open windows of summer. I was his opposite, a creature of shade and stillness. While he was captaining the football team and breaking hearts with an easy, unconscious charm, I was in the high school darkroom, lost in the alchemy of silver halide and stop bath, learning to capture the world rather than conquer it. He was the subject of so many of my early photographs, though he never knew it. Candid shots, stolen from my bedroom window. Liam, triumphant, holding a football aloft. Liam, thoughtful, staring at the horizon from his porch steps. Liam, laughing with a girl whose name I can no longer remember, his head thrown back in an expression of pure, unadulterated joy. He was a study in light. I was a student of shadow. It should have been an impossible friendship, a collision of orbits, but it was not. It was the easiest thing in the world. He seemed to understand, without my ever having to say it, that my quietness was not a judgment or a lack of interest. He saw it as a space, a harbor, and he would often drift into it after the noise of his own life became too much. He would appear at my back door, his energy field suddenly contained, and just sit with me in my room as I edited photos, the silence between us comfortable, restorative. He never demanded my attention. He simply shared my space. And in those quiet hours, I fell in love with him. It was a slow, creeping process, like the way ivy claims a brick wall, so gradual that I did not realize the totality of its hold until it was complete. It was a hopeless, secret thing, a photograph I kept undeveloped, locked away from the light for fear that exposure would destroy it. I knew, even then, that my love was a language he did not speak. His world was one of straightforward affection, of girlfriends with bright smiles and easy laughter, of a future that was as clear and well-defined as a chalked football field. My feelings were a tangled, nuanced poetry written in a dialect of longing glances and carefully chosen words. To confess would have been like trying to explain the concept of color to someone born blind. It would only cause confusion, perhaps even pity, and it would shatter the one thing I could not bear to lose, our friendship. That friendship was the bedrock of my adolescence. It was Liam who sat with me in the hospital waiting room after my father's heart attack, his solid presence a bulwark against my fear. It was Liam who, upon discovering I had no date to the senior prom, declared that he was taking his best friend, and he did so with such casual confidence that no one dared to question it. We stood for the obligatory photos, him in a rented tuxedo that fit him perfectly, me in a suit that felt like a costume, a foot of awkward space between us. I remember the scent of his cologne, the heat radiating from his skin, the almost unbearable urge to close that distance. But I did not. I kept my hands to myself, smiled for the camera, and added another undeveloped negative to my secret collection. The friendship was the masterpiece. My love was the flawed, hidden study. I would not risk the former for the impossible dream of the latter. So, I did what so many people do when they are haunted by a love they cannot have. I left. College was my escape, a new city my sanctuary. I put hundreds of miles between my heart and its anchor. I built a new life, one where Liam existed only as a voice on the phone, a name in a text message. I poured all of that stored-up devotion, all of that unspent emotion, into my photography. My work became my confession. I photographed strangers whose hands brushed for a fleeting moment on the subway, the lonely light of a single window in a dark apartment building, the way the ocean relentlessly returned to the shore, again and again, a study in faithful, unrequited love. My photographs were filled with the quiet ache of my own heart, and people responded to it. I found success. I built a career, a portfolio, a name for myself. I dated, here and there, but always kept a part of myself in reserve, a room in my heart that still had Liam's name on the door, even if the door itself remained locked. We stayed friends, of course. We were good at it. We had years of practice. We had weathered distance and new relationships and the slow, inevitable divergence of our lives. Our calls became less frequent, but never less important. Little check-ins to confirm that the foundation was still solid. He told me about his job as a consultant, the endless travel, the pressure. He told me about Sarah, the woman he thought he would marry. I told him about my gallery shows, my assignments, the beautiful emptiness of my city life. We were careful cartographers, mapping out the safe territories of our friendship, respectfully avoiding the dangerous, uncharted landmass of my feelings. For 10 years, the map held. For 10 years, the walls stood. I had convinced myself they were permanent. It was burnout that brought me home. A slow, creeping exhaustion that had bleached the color from my world and turned my passion into a burden. My agent called it a creative desert, and he prescribed a sabbatical. Go somewhere you can breathe, he had said. Go back to the beginning. The beginning was a small town in upstate New York, a 2-story house with a wraparound porch, and the ghost of a friendship I had never quite managed to exorcise. My parents had retired to Florida years ago, leaving the house empty, a time capsule of my youth. It felt like the right kind of quiet, the right kind of lonely. I went back not to find Liam, but to find myself, the version of me that existed before the city, before the galleries, before the crushing weight of expectation. I wanted to remember what it felt like to take a photograph for the pure joy of it, not for a deadline or a client. I wanted to heal. I did not call him when I first arrived. For 2 weeks, I lived like a hermit, unpacking my past, sleeping in my childhood bed, and walking the familiar woods behind the house. I was reacquainting myself with the silence, letting it seep into my bones. The silence, however, was not empty. It was filled with him. Every corner of the town held a memory. Every street was a chapter in our shared history. He was an atmospheric pressure, a presence I felt even in his absence. I knew I would have to see him eventually. I was just delaying the inevitable, putting off the moment I would have to look him in the eye and pretend that he was not the reason the beginning was also the end. The catalyst, when it came, was not my own. It was his. The news rippled through the town's gossip network, reaching me via a text from a high school acquaintance. Liam and Sarah had broken up. It was not just a breakup, it was an implosion. An engagement called off, a shared apartment suddenly empty, a future dismantled overnight. The details were murky, but the result was clear. Liam was adrift. That evening, my phone rang. His name on the screen sent a jolt through my system, a feeling I had not experienced in years. I answered, my voice carefully neutral. His was not. It was frayed at the edges, stretched thin. He did not say hello. He just said my name, a question and a plea in a single syllable. Ethan, I told him I had heard. I told him I was sorry. And then I said the words that would change everything. The words that felt both like a kindness and a terrible mistake. Do you want to come over? There was a pause, a silence so heavy I could feel its weight through the phone. Then, a quiet, broken sound. Yeah, okay. He did not need to say anything else. I understood. He was seeking harbor. And I, fool that I was, had just lit the beacon and told him the port was open. I knew, even as I hung up the phone, that the carefully drawn map of our friendship was about to be set on fire. When he arrived at my door 20 minutes later, he looked like a ship that had been battered by a hurricane. His usually bright eyes were clouded, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He was wearing a faded sweatshirt and jeans, and he had not shaved in days. He looked nothing like the golden boy of my memory, and everything like the man whose heart had just been shattered. He walked into my house, our old house, and the sheer familiarity of the space seemed to unmoor him further. He looked around the living room, at the same floral sofa and the same oak bookshelves, and a shudder went through him. He did not speak. He just stood in the middle of the room, a ghost in his own past, and I felt a profound, aching tenderness for him. This was not the confident, easygoing Liam the world knew. This was the vulnerable, quiet boy who used to seek refuge in my silence. My role, it seemed, had not changed. I was still the keeper of the quiet space. I made him a cup of tea, the way my mother used to, and we sat on the couch, the same couch where we had spent countless hours as teenagers, watching movies and talking about everything and nothing. This time, however, we did not talk. The silence was different. It was not the comfortable, easy silence of our youth. It was a heavy, fragile thing, filled with his pain. I did not push him to speak. I just sat with him, offering him the same gift he had always given me, the simple, undemanding gift of presence. After an hour of this weighted silence, he finally spoke, his voice raspy. She said I was emotionally unavailable. He stared at the floor, his hands wrapped around the warm mug of tea as if it were a lifeline. Like a locked room she could never get into, the metaphor struck me with a physical force. A locked room. I knew everything about locked rooms. My heart was a mansion of them. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I knew what it felt like to keep the most important parts of yourself hidden away. But I said nothing. I just listened as the story tumbled out of him, a disjointed narrative of miscommunication, unmet expectations, and the slow, painful erosion of love. He was not looking for advice or absolution. He was looking for a place to put his pain, a container strong enough to hold it. And so I became that container. I listened until his words ran out, until all that was left was the raw, quiet hum of his grief. The old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. He looked up, his eyes unfocused, as if surprised by the passage of time. I should go, he mumbled, but he made no move to stand. He looked utterly, completely depleted. The thought of him going back to an empty apartment, to a bed that was now too big, felt like a cruelty. The words left my mouth before I had a chance to vet them for foolishness. You can stay here. On the couch, he looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of the old Liam in his eyes, a glimmer of gratitude. Are you sure? I nodded. It's a big couch, he managed a weak, grateful smile. Yeah, it is. I retrieved a pillow and a blanket from the linen closet upstairs, the same one my mom had always used for sleepovers. As I handed them to him, our fingers brushed. It was a spark in the dark, a brief, electric contact that I felt all the way to my core. He did not seem to notice. He just took the bedding, mumbled a thank you, and turned to the couch. I went upstairs to my own room, the locked room, and lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sound of his breathing from the floor below. The house was no longer just a house. It was a harbor, and a storm had just come in. That night established the beginning of a new, unspoken ritual. He did not go home the next morning. I came downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, looking as though he had not slept at all. We ate breakfast in a silence that felt less heavy than the night before, a silence that was beginning to regain its old, comfortable shape. He left in the afternoon to deal with the grim logistics of his dismantled life, but he returned in the evening, as if drawn by an invisible tide. He brought pizza. We ate it on the floor, watching an old movie we both knew by heart. And when the credits rolled, he did not even make the pretense of leaving. He just gestured to the couch. "Is it?" "Of course," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil in my chest. This became our new normal. Liam would spend his days sorting through the wreckage of his relationship and his evenings seeking refuge in the quiet sanctuary of my house. The couch became his bed. My presence became his comfort. I told myself it was what any good friend would do. I told myself it was temporary, a necessary kindness until he was back on his feet. But a part of me, a dangerous, hopeful part, knew that something profound was shifting between us. The carefully maintained distance of our adult friendship was collapsing. We were reverting to an older, more intimate geography, the easy proximity of our youth, but now it was charged with a new, volatile energy. I was intensely, painfully aware of him in a way I had not allowed myself to be in years. I was aware of the way he filled the space, the scent of his soap that now clung to my living room, the sound of his soft snores that drifted up the stairs in the dead of night. My house, my sanctuary of healing, had become a temple of exquisite torture. The ritual evolved. After a week of him sleeping on the couch, I woke one morning to a sound from downstairs. It was not a nightmare, not a cry of pain, but a low, guttural sound of distress. I found him in the living room, curled into a tight ball on the sofa, his body rigid, his breathing ragged. He was awake, but trapped in the throes of a panic attack. I had never seen him like this, so completely undone. The invincible, sun-drenched boy of my memory was gone, replaced by this trembling, terrified man. I did not think. I acted. I sat on the floor beside him, my voice low and steady, and talked him through it. I told him to breathe with me. I described the grain of the wood on the floor, the color of the sky outside the window, anything to anchor him to the present moment. Slowly, painstakingly, his breathing evened out. The rigidity left his limbs. He uncurled himself and looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shame and gratitude. "Sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Nightmares, it's okay," I said. "You're okay." He did not go back to sleep on the couch. He sat there, wrapped in the blanket, until the sun came up. The next night, he hesitated before settling on the couch. There was a fear in his eyes, a dread of the dark and what it might bring. I found myself saying something I never imagined I would. "The couch is terrible for your back. You can take the spare room if you want." It was a lie. There was no spare room. There was only my room, with its queen-sized bed. He knew this. We both knew what I was offering. He looked from me to the stairs, a silent, weighty debate playing out on his face. "I don't want to intrude," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're not intruding, Liam," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's just a bed," but it was not just a bed. It was a boundary, and he was about to cross it. He followed me upstairs, his steps hesitant. My room was a reflection of me, neat, ordered, minimalist. A few of my own black and white photographs hung on the walls. The bed was made with a simple gray duvet. It was a monastic, quiet space. He stood in the doorway, looking small and uncertain, as if he were afraid to enter. I tried to make it normal, to strip the moment of its terrifying significance. "You can take the side by the wall," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "I have to get up early anyway," he nodded, not meeting my eyes. We changed in a clumsy, unspoken choreography of averted gazes, him in the bathroom, me in the bedroom. When he emerged, wearing a t-shirt and pajama pants I had loaned him, the reality of the situation crashed down on me. Liam was going to sleep in my bed. He was going to be inches away from me for an entire night. I slipped under the covers, keeping my body rigidly on my designated side, creating as much space between us as the mattress would allow. He did the same. The silence was deafening. It was not comfortable or easy. It was electric, humming with 1,000 unsaid things. I could feel the heat of his body across the small gulf of cotton sheets. I could hear every breath he took. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my senses on high alert. This was so much more dangerous than the couch. The couch offered plausible deniability. This was an admission of something, though I did not know what. It was an admission of a need so profound that it overrode years of unspoken rules. He needed comfort. He needed to not be alone in the dark, and he had chosen me to provide that. The thought was both a comfort and a terror. This, too, became part of the ritual. The pretense of the couch was abandoned. Every night, he would follow me upstairs. Every night, we would perform the same silent, awkward dance of getting into bed. And every night, I would lie awake for hours, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. He seemed to sleep better, the nightmares held at bay by our shared proximity. Sometimes, in the deep of the night, he would shift in his sleep, his arm brushing against mine, his leg falling across my own. Each accidental touch was a brand, a searing point of contact that sent my mind reeling. I would lie perfectly still, not daring to breathe, until he moved away again. I became an expert in the cartography of his sleep. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way it deepened when he finally slipped into unconsciousness. I learned that he mumbled sometimes, fragmented words from a world I could not enter. I learned that he radiated a warmth that was like a furnace, a heat that I craved and feared in equal measure. During the day, we were friends. We cooked meals together, we went for walks, we talked about books and movies and the slow, painful process of his healing. We were careful to maintain the illusion of platonic normalcy. But at night, in the quiet darkness of my room, the lines blurred. We were two bodies sharing a space, two solitudes reaching for a connection they could not name. I was living in a state of suspended animation, trapped between the agony of my desire and the profound, tender peace of his closeness. It was a beautiful, unsustainable purgatory. I started to see the change in him, small shifts in the emotional landscape. He began to look at me differently. Sometimes I would catch him watching me when he thought I was not looking, his expression unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and something else, something deeper that I did not dare to name. The physical boundary between us began to erode during the daylight hours as well. He would stand closer to me in the kitchen, his arm brushing mine as he reached for a glass. He would lean in to look at the photographs I was editing, his breath warm on my neck. He initiated touch more often, a hand on my shoulder, a playful nudge with his elbow. Each gesture was small enough to be deniable, a simple act of friendship. But taken together, they formed a pattern, a new language he was developing. Or perhaps it was an old language he was finally remembering how to speak. I was his analyst, his interpreter, and his terrified subject. Every glance, every touch, was a piece of data I would analyze for hours in the privacy of my own mind. Was this just the desperate clinging of a man in pain, or was it something more? Was he seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time? The hope was a dangerous, seductive poison. It made me reckless. I started to let my own guard down, to allow myself to meet his gaze for a moment too long, to let my hand linger when it brushed against his. We were orbiting each other, caught in a gravitational pull that was growing stronger every day. The space between us was shrinking, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that a collision was inevitable. One rainy Thursday, about a month into our strange cohabitation, the tension finally reached its breaking point. The rain had been falling all day, a steady, hypnotic drumming that had kept us indoors. We had spent the afternoon in a comfortable silence, me reading, him scrolling through his phone. But as evening fell, the atmosphere in the house grew thick and charged, heavy with the same electrical energy as the storm outside. We made dinner together, a simple pasta dish, moving around each other in the small kitchen with a practiced, intimate grace. The air was so dense with unspoken things that I felt I could barely breathe. We ate at the kitchen table, the only sounds the clinking of our forks and the relentless rain against the window panes. He was quiet, his gaze distant. I could feel his anxiety radiating off him, a low, thrumming frequency. After dinner, we gravitated to the living room, but we did not turn on the television. We just sat on the couch, a foot of space between us, and listened to the storm. The silence stretched, taut, and fragile. I could feel a question building in him, a pressure mounting behind his eyes. I braced myself, unsure of what was coming, but knowing it was significant. Finally, he turned to me, his expression raw and vulnerable. "Ethan," he began, his voice low, "why are you so good to me?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it disarmed me completely. I had no shield for it, no carefully constructed platitude. I just looked at him, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. "You're my best friend, Liam," I said, the words feeling thin and inadequate. "Of course I'm good to you," he shook his head slowly, his eyes searching mine. "No, it's more than that. Anyone else would have gotten tired of me by now. They would have pushed me to get over it, to move on. But you just let me be. You make space for it." For me, he looked down at his hands. "I don't think I've ever had that before." Not really. The admission hung in the air between us, a fragile, beautiful thing. He was giving me a piece of himself I had never seen before, a glimpse into the locked room of his own heart. He was telling me that he saw what I was doing, that he understood the nature of the gift I was giving him. He was validating a part of me I had always kept hidden. I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to confess the decade of love I had held in silence, to explain that the space I made for him was not an act of friendship, but an act of devotion. I wanted to bridge the final, terrifying gap between us and pull him into my arms. But the fear of his rejection, the fear of shattering this fragile, sacred space we had created, was still too strong. So I chose my words carefully, offering him a piece of the truth, a version he could accept without it destroying us. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "it's because I know what it's like to need a quiet place." His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a flicker of understanding, a recognition. It was as if he was finally seeing the full picture, the developed photograph. The distance between us on the couch suddenly felt like a chasm. He leaned forward, just an inch, a barely perceptible shift, but it changed the entire dynamic of the room. It was an invitation. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against the rhythm of the rain. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity. This was it, the moment I had dreamed of and dreaded for half my life. The air crackled. The world narrowed to the space between our faces, the look in his eyes, the slight parting of his lips. He was waiting. He was giving me the choice. I could lean back, preserve the safety of our friendship, and spend the rest of my life wondering. Or I could lean forward, risk everything, and finally find out. He broke the silence first, his voice a ragged whisper that was nearly lost beneath the sound of the rain. "Ethan, would it be okay?" He did not have to finish the sentence. I knew what he was asking. He was asking for permission to cross the final boundary. He was asking if it was safe. He was giving me all the power, laying his vulnerability at my feet. In that moment, all my years of fear, of self-protection, of quiet observation, they all just evaporated. The risk no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was the man in front of me, his heart in his eyes, offering me a key to the room I had only ever dreamed of entering. I did not speak. I did not trust my voice. I simply nodded, a small, jerky movement that felt like the most significant gesture of my entire life. A wave of relief washed over his face, so profound it was like watching the sun break through the storm clouds. He leaned in slowly, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I did not. I met him halfway, and then his lips were on mine. It was not a passionate, desperate kiss. It was something far more profound. It was a question and an answer, a confession and an absolution. It was soft and hesitant and unbelievably gentle. It was the taste of rain and salt and a decade of unspoken longing. It was the feeling of coming home. We stayed like that for a long moment, a chaste, still kiss that was more about connection than desire. It was a confirmation, a silent agreement. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His breathing was unsteady. So was mine. "Okay," he breathed out, the word a sigh of relief. "Okay." The storm outside raged on, but inside, in the quiet living room of my childhood home. The world had gone completely, perfectly still. We had crossed the line. There was no going back. And for the first time in a very long time, I did not want to. That night, when we went up to my room, everything was different. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a quiet, reverent tenderness. When we got into bed, he did not stay on his side. He turned to face me, his body a warm, solid line next to mine. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. It was a simple, proprietary gesture, an anchor in the new, uncharted waters we found ourselves in. We did not speak. There were no words for what had just happened, for the monumental shift that had occurred. We just lay there, face to face, holding hands in the dark, listening to each other breathe. I studied his face in the dim light filtering through the window, the familiar lines and planes of it suddenly new and precious. He was watching me with the same intensity, his eyes dark with an emotion I was finally allowing myself to believe in. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I fell asleep, my hand still in his. I woke to the first light of dawn, a pale, gray light that filled the room with a soft glow. He was still there, his grip on my hand having loosened in sleep. His face was relaxed, peaceful, the lines of stress and grief that had been etched there for weeks finally smoothed away. He looked younger. He looked like the boy I had fallen in love with all those years ago. A wave of love so fierce, so overwhelming, washed over me that it left me breathless. This was real. This was happening. I lay there for a long time, watching him sleep, memorizing the moment. I was a photographer, after all. It was what I did. I captured fleeting moments of beauty and held them against the darkness. And this quiet, peaceful morning, was the most beautiful photograph I had ever taken. The aftermath was not the explosion I had feared, but a quiet, unsettling silence. When I woke again, a few hours later, his side of the bed was empty. The warmth of his body was gone. I could hear the shower running downstairs, a normal, domestic sound that should have been reassuring. But a knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. I went downstairs to find a fresh pot of coffee brewed, a cup poured and waiting for me on the counter. But Liam was gone. There was no note, no text, just an empty house that felt colder and larger than it had a few hours before. The silence that had been so comforting was now ominous, a vacuum where tenderness had been. I drank the coffee he had made for me, my mind racing. I told myself not to panic. He probably had things to do, errands to run. He was a man whose life had been turned upside down. He had logistics to manage. It was normal, but the knot in my stomach did not loosen. It tightened with every passing hour. I sent him a text in the late morning, something casual. "Hey, thanks for the coffee. Everything okay?" The three little dots appeared, indicating he was typing, and then they vanished. No reply came. The silence from his end was a physical weight, pressing down on me. The beautiful, fragile certainty of the night before began to fracture, doubt and fear seeping in through the cracks. Had I imagined it all? The look in his eyes, the gentleness of his kiss, the way he held my hand as if he would never let go? Had it just been a moment of grief-fueled confusion for him, a desperate reach for comfort that he now regretted in the harsh light of day? The thought was a cold, sharp pain in my chest. I had risked everything, and it seemed I had lost. For 2 days, I existed in a state of suspended agony. He did not come back. He did not call. He did not answer my texts. The house, which had been our shared sanctuary, now felt like a prison, each room echoing with his absence. The couch where it had all begun, the kitchen where we had cooked together, the bed where we had slept, they were all crime scenes, haunting reminders of a beautiful thing that had perhaps only ever existed in my own mind. I was furious with myself for being so foolish, for mistaking a moment of weakness for a declaration of love. I was furious with him for being a coward, for running away without a single word of explanation. And beneath the anger, there was a deep, profound hurt. He had not just rejected me. He had invalidated the intimacy we had shared. He had taken something sacred and treated it as if it were meaningless. I tried to work, to lose myself in my photography, but the world outside my window seemed gray and lifeless. I could not find the light. Everything was out of focus. The quiet I had come home to find had turned against me, amplifying my own anxious thoughts until they were a deafening roar. I was back where I had started, only worse. Before, my love had been a secret, a quiet, manageable ache. Now, it was an open wound. On the third day, I decided I could not live in the ambiguity any longer. The uncertainty was more painful than any rejection could be. I needed to know the truth, even if it was the truth I dreaded most. I needed to look him in the eye and demand an explanation. I needed to reclaim my own peace, even if it meant shattering the last vestiges of our friendship. I got in my car and drove to the small apartment he was renting on the other side of town, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I was going to get my answer. One way or another, the silence was about to end. He opened the door after the third knock, and the sight of him almost made me lose my resolve. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he had been in 2 days ago. His hair was a mess, and the dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced than ever. He looked haunted, exhausted, and utterly miserable. He did not look like a man who was relieved to have escaped a mistake. He looked like a man who was trapped in one. "Ethan," he said, his voice thick with sleep and something else. Surprise. Fear. He made no move to let me in, just stood there, blocking the doorway, his hand on the frame. "What are you doing here?" "I think you know what I'm doing here, Liam," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I came for an explanation. Or an apology. Frankly, I'm not picky." He flinched at the coldness in my tone. He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I can't do this right now." "No, you don't get to do that," I said, a surge of anger cutting through my hurt. "You don't get to kiss me. You don't get to hold my hand all night and make me feel like something real was happening, and then just disappear. You don't get to treat me like that. I'm not some regrettable one-night stand. I'm your best friend." Or I was. The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading anguish. "That's just it, Ethan," he whispered. "You're my best friend. You're the most important person in my life. What if I just broke that? What if I broke the only thing I have left that's good and whole?" His confession, his fear, it was so raw and so honest that it knocked the anger right out of me, leaving only a deep, aching sadness. He was not running from me. He was running from himself. He was terrified of the same thing I had been terrified of for 10 years, losing our friendship. The irony was devastating. We were two people who loved each other, terrified of that very love. I pushed past him gently and stepped into the apartment. It was a disaster. Boxes were half unpacked, clothes were strewn everywhere, and the air was stale and sad. It was the physical manifestation of his mental state. I turned to face him. "So that's what this is?" I asked, my voice softer now. "You're panicking." He ran a hand through his hair, his movements agitated. "Panicking? Ethan, I'm coming apart. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about myself. It's all gone. I thought I was going to marry Sarah. I thought I knew what my future looked like. And then, it all fell apart. And I came to you, and you were this anchor, this quiet, steady place in the middle of the hurricane. And it felt so good, so right, to be with you. It felt more right than anything has in years." He started pacing the small living room, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "And then I kissed you, and it wasn't a mistake. That's the terrifying part. It felt like I'd been waiting my whole life to do it. It felt like coming home. And that's what's wrecking me. Because who am I? What does that mean? I've never felt that way about a guy before. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to be that person." He finally stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading vulnerability. "I'm so scared of hurting you," he whispered. "I'm so scared of ruining the one good thing I have left." I listened to his torrent of words, and I felt the last of my hurt and anger dissolve, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of empathy. He was not a coward. He was just a man who had been handed a new map of his own heart and did not know how to read it. He was lost, and he was trying to protect me in his own clumsy, painful way. I closed the distance between us and put my hands on his shoulders, forcing him to be still, to look at me. "Liam," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "Look at me. You think you're protecting me by running away? By leaving me alone for 2 days to wonder if I imagined everything? To feel like the world's biggest fool? That's not protection. That's cruelty. It's the cruelest thing you've ever done to me, he winced, the truth of my words hitting him. I didn't. I didn't mean to. I know you didn't, I said. But you need to stop thinking about who you're supposed to be and just think about what you feel. You said kissing me felt like coming home. You said being with me felt right. Do you trust that feeling? He stared at me, his internal battle raging on his face. I don't know how, he said, his voice breaking. It's all new. It's terrifying. I know it's terrifying, I said, my grip on his shoulders tightening. Do you think it hasn't been terrifying for me? Liam, I have been in love with you since we were 17 years old. The confession fell from my lips, simple and absolute. It was not planned. It was a truth that had demanded to be spoken. The shock on his face was total. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless. I have spent more than a decade being terrified. I continued, my voice shaking slightly, but my resolve firm. I was terrified of losing you, of ruining our friendship. I built my whole life around that fear. And I came back here to heal, and you showed up, and this beautiful, impossible thing started to happen. And for one night, I let myself believe in it. I let go of the fear, and it was the best night of my life. I finally let go of his shoulders, taking a step back. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, Liam. I'm not asking you to put a label on it or plan a future. I'm just asking you to stop running. I'm asking you to be brave enough to stay, to just be here with me and see what happens. Can you do that? Can you just stay? The silence that followed was the most profound of my life. He just stood there, staring at me, my confession echoing in the space between us. I could see him processing it, recontextualizing our entire history through this new lens. All the quiet moments, all the shared silences, all the years of my unwavering presence in his life. It was all clicking into place for him. He took a slow, shaky breath, and then he did something that undid me completely. He began to cry, not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet, wrenching tears that tracked silently down his face. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. All this time, he choked out from behind his hands. All this time, and I was so blind. I stepped forward again and wrapped my arms around him, pulling him into a hug. He collapsed against me, his body trembling, and I held him tightly, my own eyes burning with tears. I held him as he cried for his lost future, for his confusion, for his fear, and for the years of love he had never seen. I just held him, my hand stroking the back of his head, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay. I've got you." We stood like that for a long time, in the middle of his messy, chaotic apartment, two broken people holding each other together. When his tears finally subsided, he pulled back, his face blotchy and his eyes red, but clearer than I had seen them in days. He looked at me, really looked at me, and a small, watery smile touched his lips. "You love me," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of wondrous, unbelievable fact. I smiled back, my own tears finally spilling over. "Always," I whispered. He shook his head in disbelief, a single, wet laugh escaping him. "Okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached up and wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "Okay, I'll stay. I'm not running anymore." We did not go back to my house that day. We stayed in his apartment, his messy, transitional space, and we began the slow, deliberate work of building something new. We talked for hours. He asked me questions about my feelings, about when it started, about how I had managed to hide it for so long. He listened with a new, focused intensity, his eyes full of a tender regret for all the years he had not known. I, in turn, listened to his fears, his confusion, his anxieties about what this all meant. We laid all our cards on the table, all our broken pieces, and we looked at them together. There was no magical moment of clarity for him, no sudden, dramatic proclamation. It was quieter than that. It was a gradual, dawning acceptance. It was him admitting that the peace and safety he felt with me was something he had never experienced with anyone else, not even Sarah. It was him acknowledging that his desire to be near me, to touch me, to share my space, was not just about friendship or comfort, but something deeper, something he was just beginning to understand. We ordered food. We started to clean up the apartment together, a symbolic act of clearing out the old to make way for the new. We worked side by side, a comfortable, domestic rhythm falling into place as if we had been doing it for years. As we worked, we touched. A hand on the small of the back as we passed in the hallway, fingers brushing as we folded laundry, his arm around my shoulder as we looked at a pile of boxes. Each touch was intentional now, a quiet affirmation. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a careful, deliberate tenderness. This was not the frenzied passion of a new romance. It was something quieter, deeper, and more profound. It was the feeling of two foundations finally settling into place, side by side. That night, we drove back to my house. As we walked through the door, the space felt different. It was no longer just my sanctuary, it was ours. The ghosts of anxiety and uncertainty had been exorcised. When it was time for bed, there was no hesitation. We walked up the stairs together, hand in hand. In my room, we undressed without the averted gazes, with a simple, comfortable intimacy. When we slipped under the covers, he pulled me against him, his arm wrapping around my waist, my head finding its natural place on his chest. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my ear. It was the most calming sound in the world. "Is this okay?" he whispered into my hair, his voice a low rumble. I smiled into his chest. "It's more than okay," I said. He tightened his arm around me, his body a warm, protective shield. "I'm sorry I ran," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I was just so scared." "I know," I said. "Me too." For a very long time, we fell into a comfortable silence. But this silence was different from all the ones that had come before. It was not empty or heavy or charged with unspoken tension. It was full. It was a silence of complete understanding, of mutual acceptance. It was the silence of home. I felt his lips press against the top of my head, a soft, gentle kiss that spoke volumes. I closed my eyes, breathing in his familiar scent, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my heart was completely, utterly still. I was not waiting. I was not analyzing. I was not afraid. I was just there, with him, and it was enough. It was everything. In the weeks that followed, we began to build our new normal. It was a quiet, gentle process, like the turning of a season. Liam slowly moved his things from his sad, temporary apartment into my house, his presence gradually and permanently embedding itself into the space. His coffee mug found a permanent home next to mine. His clothes started to mingle with mine in the closet. His toothbrush appeared in the holder next to mine. They were small, domestic milestones, each one a quiet testament to his decision to stay. We learned each other's rhythms, the intimate choreography of sharing a life. I learned that he was an early riser, that he made the best pancakes, and that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating. He learned that I needed an hour of silence in the morning to feel human, that I was meticulous about how my photographs were organized, and that I had a tendency to leave half-empty glasses of water all over the house. We were not just lovers. We were partners, rediscovering the best friend we had almost lost in the process of finding something more. The physical intimacy between us grew naturally, tentatively at first, and then with a growing confidence. It was an exploration, a new language we were learning to speak together. It was full of gentle touches, lazy morning cuddles, and soft, searching kisses that still felt like a revelation every single time. It was less about passion and more about a profound, comforting intimacy, a way of reaffirming again and again, "You are here. I am here. We are safe." The world outside our quiet bubble continued on, but it seemed distant, muted. We did not hide, but we did not announce ourselves either. We existed in the space we had created for ourselves, a world bounded by the walls of my house and the familiar landscapes of our small town. We took long walks in the woods, our hands intertwined. We drove to the coast and watched the ocean, sitting in a comfortable silence that was now our native tongue. I started taking photographs again, but my subject had changed. My lens was no longer focused on the lonely, fleeting moments of strangers. It was focused on him, Liam, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, reading on the porch. Liam, laughing, his head thrown back, as we cooked dinner. Liam, asleep in our bed, his face peaceful and unguarded. My art was no longer an expression of longing. It had become an expression of fulfillment. I was no longer capturing the ache of what was missing, but the profound, quiet beauty of what I had found. He was no longer just a study in light. He was my light. He was the subject, the muse, and the warm, steady hand on my back as I worked. He healed the part of me that had been broken, the creative heart that had gone fallow. He brought the color back into my world. One evening, months after that first, tentative kiss, we were lying in bed, reading. The house was quiet, the only sound the rustle of turning pages. I looked over at him, at the way the lamplight carved his profile, at the familiar, beloved lines of his face, and I was struck by a sense of peace so deep it felt like it had settled into my very bones. He must have felt my gaze, because he looked up from his book, a small, questioning smile on his lips. "What?" he asked. I smiled back. "Nothing," I said. "Just this." "It's good." His smile widened. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his touch gentle and familiar. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "It really is." He put his book down and shifted closer, wrapping his arms around me and pulling me against his chest. I rested my head in its familiar place, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. The door to the bedroom was closed. The world outside was quiet. The storm had passed. I had come home to heal myself, to find a quiet place to put the pieces of my life back together. I had not expected to find that the quiet place was not a place at all. It was a person. It was the boy next door, the one I had loved in secret for a lifetime. We had found our way back to each other, not by grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the slow, patient work of making space, of listening, and of being brave enough to stay. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned, finally, to create together.